the orphan girl and her widowed mother, the rancher who changed their lives forever, the prairie was wide and merciless, stretching to the horizon with a beauty that held both promise and cruelty. For some, it was a land of opportunity. For others, like Mary Thompson and her young daughter Anna, it was a place of survival, a daily battle against hunger, cold, and loneliness. Mary had once been a wife to a hard-working man, John Thompson, who had dreamed of carving out a future on the frontier. But dreams ended quickly when a fever swept through the land 2 winters ago. Within days, John was gone, leaving Mary a widow at only 27 and Anna fatherless at 7. Now, their days were marked by scarcity. Their small shack at the edge of Dry Creek Town sagged with disrepair, its roof patched with scraps and its door that creaked in the wind. Inside, the pantry shelves were nearly bare, holding only a few jars of beans, cornmeal, and the last of the dried apples John had once stored away. Mary worked as a laundress for townsfolk when she could, her hands raw from scrubbing, her back aching from carrying wet linens. But laundry paid little, and even less when the townsfolk turned their noses at her. Some whispered that her misfortune was a curse. Others simply didn't care. Anna, though just a child, understood more than Mary wished she did. She wore her shoes until the solace split, her dresses patched and repatched, yet she never complained. Instead, she stayed close to her mother, trying to help with chores her small hands could manage. At night, she would whisper, "Don't cry, Mama. We'll be all right," though her own stomach twisted with hunger. The loneliness pressed hardest in winter evenings, when the fire burned low and silence filled the small shack. Mary would look at her daughter curled beneath a thin quilt and wonder how much longer she could endure. She had no family nearby, no friends willing to help, and no man who wished to shoulder the burden of a widow and her child. Every so often, someone in town would suggest she remarry. "A woman can't live alone out here," they would say, some with pity, others with disdain. But no suitor came forward. Not one man interested in a woman worn down by grief and a child, who needed more than most were willing to give. Mary told herself she didn't need anyone, that she could endure this life with Anna alone. But each morning, when she woke with aching limbs and fear pressing heavy on her chest, she knew the truth. She was near breaking. Anna, though, carried a quiet light. She was small, with bright eyes that saw the world more kindly than it deserved. While Mary felt the weight of every cruel whisper in town, Anna found wonder in the simplest things: the sound of meadowlarks singing at dawn, the way sunlight poured through cracks in the shack's roof, the coolness of creek water on her bare feet. She clung to hope, even when her mother could not. One evening, as Mary mended Anna's dress by lamplight, her daughter leaned close and said softly, "Mama, maybe God will send us help. Maybe someone will be kind." Mary smiled faintly, though. Tears stung her eyes. "Perhaps, my dear, but we mustn't count on miracles." Yet in her heart, Mary longed for one. Little did she know, across the wide plains, a man with quiet strength and a ranch to his name was about to ride into their lives. A man whose presence would turn whispers of despair into a story of hope, and whose choice would change everything for both mother and child. Dry Creek was not a large town, but it had sharp eyes and sharper tongues. Every soul seemed to know everyone else's business, and Mary Thompson and her daughter Anna were no exception. The townsfolk rarely spoke kindly of them, and when they did, the words carried the sour taste of pity rather than genuine concern. Mary walked into town most mornings with her basket of laundry balanced against her hip, head lowered against the stairs. She would collect soiled clothes from wealthier families, wash them in the creek behind her shack, and then return them neatly folded for a few coins. It was work that paid barely enough to keep food on the table, Yet even that lifeline came with humiliation. "Poor thing," one woman muttered as Mary passed. "Widowed so young. Maybe if she hadn't come here with that husband of hers, she wouldn't be in this mess." "She ought to find herself a man," another said, her voice not even hushed. "A woman with a child can't survive alone. It isn't natural." Their words pierced Mary like knives, but she kept her chin up. For Anna's sake, she had learned to swallow pride long ago. Still, the weight of judgment pressed heavier each day. Children, too, could be cruel. When Anna tried to play with the others in the dusty street, they pushed her aside, mocking her patched dress and thin frame. "Don't touch her," one boy jeered. "Her mama's cursed. My pa says that's why her daddy died." Anna didn't cry in front of them. She would only run back to her mother, clutching at her skirt, her wide eyes brimming with questions she didn't ask. Mary would smooth her daughter's hair and whisper, "Don't listen to them, my love. You are worth more than all their cruel words." But in her heart, she wondered if they would ever escape the shadows cast by poverty and grief. The men in town were no better. Some leered openly, offering quick companionship in exchange for little more than Mary's dignity. Others laughed at the thought of taking on a widow with a child dead weight, they called it. Suitors were not truly suitors at all, only opportunists. And Mary knew well enough to keep her distance. There were days she thought of leaving Dry Creek altogether, of packing what little they had and heading west to start anew. But where would they go? The land beyond was unforgiving, and without money. She and Anna would be swallowed by the wilderness. One evening, Mary brought Anna into the general store to trade her last jar of dried apples for flour. The room grew uncomfortably quiet when they entered. She felt the eyes of neighbors on her as she approached the counter. Mr. Jenkins, the storekeeper, forced a polite smile but couldn't resist a muttered comment as he weighed the flour. "Can't live off pity forever. Mary, maybe. Time you find yourself a proper household." Mary's jaw tightened. She took the sack of flour, thanked him in the calmest tone she could manage, and led Anna out of the store before her trembling hands gave her away. Outside, Anna slipped her hand into her mother's. "Why are they so mean, Mama?" "We never hurt anyone." Mary crouched down and looked into her daughter's innocent eyes. She wanted to say it was because people were cruel or afraid of what they didn't understand. But instead, she forced a smile. "Some folks forget how to be kind. But we mustn't forget. You and I will always choose kindness." Anna nodded, though her lips trembled. That night, Mary lay awake listening to the wind rattle the thin walls of their shack. The weight of loneliness pressed hard against her chest. She could endure hunger. She could endure hard work, but the cruelty of others, the constant reminder that she and Anna were outsiders, chipped away at her spirit. She whispered a prayer into the darkness, though she wasn't sure who she prayed to anymore. "Lord, if there is kindness left in this world, let it find us soon." Unbeknownst to her, that prayer was already on its way to being answered. Fate was guiding a quiet, solitary rancher toward Dry Creek One, whose heart had been as empty as hers, and who would soon see value in the two souls everyone else had dismissed. The storm came suddenly, rolling across the prairie with a fury that turned the afternoon sky to dusk. Wind howled through the streets of Dry Creek, rattling shutters and slamming doors as townsfolk hurried to their homes. Most people had already taken cover, but one small figure lingered near the edge of town. Her thin dress plastered to her body by rain. Anna. She had gone to fetch a bundle of firewood when the storm broke. By the time she returned to the shack, Mary was frantic with worry. But the wind tore the door from Mary's hands, and in the chaos, Anna lost her footing and ran, seeking shelter beneath the awning of the livery stable instead. It was there that Thomas Carter found her. Thomas was a rancher who lived miles outside town, a man known more for his silence than his company. He came to Dry Creek rarely, mostly for supplies, and kept to himself otherwise. Folks said he was still haunted by loss, his wife and unborn child, gone years before in a fever that left his ranch silent as a grave. Since then he had spoken little and smiled less. That evening, as he rode into town with his hat pulled low against the rain, his horse startled at the sight of a small figure huddled in the mud. Thomas dismounted quickly, kneeling beside the shivering girl. "What are you doing out here, little one?" His voice was steady, though concern crept through his tone. Anna looked up, water streaming down her cheeks, her lips trembling. I lost my mama. The storm came too fast." Thomas glanced around. The streets were nearly empty, townsfolk safe inside. Without hesitation, he pulled his coat from his shoulders and wrapped it around her small frame. The coat swallowed her whole, but it gave her warmth. "Let's find your mother," he said gently, lifting her into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. The sight of a stranger carrying her daughter sent Mary running through the rain, her heart hammering with both fear and relief. She reached them just outside the shack, clutching at Anna with frantic hands. "Anna!" "Oh, thank heavens!" Her eyes flicked up to Thomas, wary but grateful. "You found her?" Thomas gave a small nod. She was near the stable. Looked half frozen. Mary smoothed Anna's wet hair, whispering thanks, though her pride kept her from saying too much. She ushered her daughter inside the shack, expecting the man to leave. But instead, Thomas lingered at the doorway, noting the leaking roof and the thin walls that barely kept out the storm. "You'll catch cold in a place like this," he said, his voice carrying no judgment, only plain fact. Mary stiffened. "It's all we have." He looked at her then, not with pity, but with a steady gaze that made her feel both seen and unsettled. Finally, he tipped his hat. "I'll bring wood for your fire." Before she could protest, he was gone into the rain. Moments later, he returned with an armful of dry logs from his wagon. He stacked them neatly by the hearth, his movements efficient, practiced. Without another word, he lit the fire, the warm glow chasing shadows from the room. Anna curled close to the flames, her cheeks pink again, while Mary stood nearby, unsure what to say. No man had ever offered help without asking for something. In return, Thomas seemed to sense her hesitation. "Don't fret. I expect nothing. Just couldn't leave you both to the storm." With that, he replaced his hat, nodded once more, and stepped back into the rain, vanishing as quietly as he had arrived. Mary watched him go, her heart strangely unsettled. She had grown used to cruelty, to suspicion, to surviving alone. But this man, a stranger, had shown a kindness she had nearly forgotten existed. That night, as the fire burned brighter than it had in weeks, Anna whispered sleepily, "Mama, he was kind. Maybe he's the help God is sending." Mary brushed a hand across her daughter's forehead, torn between hope and fear. "Perhaps, my love, perhaps." She didn't know then that Thomas Carter's quiet act of compassion was only the beginning, that his path would soon be bound to theirs in ways neither could yet imagine. In the days following the storm, Mary told herself that the rancher's visit had been nothing more than chance, a passing kindness from a man who owed her and Anna nothing. She expected never to see him again. Yet life has a way of surprising those who have given up on it. 2 mornings later, the sound of hooves stirred her from sleep. She opened the shack door cautiously, squinting into the sunlight. There he was, Thomas Carter, dismounting with quiet ease, a small sack slung over his shoulder. "Brought some flour and beans," he said simply, setting the sack at her feet. Mary stiffened. Her pride stung. "We didn't ask for charity." Thomas met her eyes steadily. "Not charity, a neighbor lending a hand, that's all." Before she could argue, Anna darted past her mother, eyes wide with delight. "You came back," she exclaimed, tugging. at his hand with childlike trust. A flicker of warmth crossed Thomas's weathered face, a smile so faint it could almost be missed. "Looks like I did," he answered softly. From that day forward, Thomas came often, never overstaying, never intruding, but always bringing something useful: wood for the fire, tools to mend the door, seed for planting. He worked silently, his strong hands skilled and sure, and when the tasks were done, he tipped his hat and left without asking for thanks. At first, Mary wrestled with her pride. She had fought so long to survive alone, to endure the whispers and judgments, that accepting help felt almost like surrender. Yet each time Thomas appeared, she saw the way Anna's eyes lit up, how her laughter came easier in his presence. And slowly, Mary's walls began to soften. One afternoon, Thomas taught Anna how to rope a stick horse he had carved for her. The little girl giggled as she tossed the loop clumsily, her joy ringing like bells in the quiet yard. Mary watched. From the doorway, her heart caught between gratitude and fear. She hadn't seen Anna so happy in years, not since John had been alive. Later, when Anna ran off to chase butterflies, Mary found herself alone with Thomas. The silence between them was thick, filled with words neither dared to speak. Finally, she broke it. "You've done more for us in weeks than anyone in this town has done in years. Why?" Thomas shifted, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Because I know what it is to lose. And I know what it is to be left alone when you need someone most." His voice was quiet, but the weight in it was heavy. Mary studied him, seeing then what the townsfolk never cared to notice, the loneliness etched in his eyes, the grief carried in his silence. He was not a man saving them out of pity. He was a man who understood their pain because he carried his own. That evening, after Thomas left, Anna tugged at her mother's sleeve. "He's different, Mama. Not like the others. He cares." Mary tucked her daughter into bed, her heart torn. "Maybe so, my love. But we must be careful." Yet deep inside, something unfamiliar stirred, something dangerously close to hope. The bond between the three of them grew with each passing week, not loud or sudden, but steady, like roots sinking quietly into the earth. Anna began to chatter about ranch chores and horses, her world expanding beyond the small shack. And Mary, though cautious, found herself waiting for the sound of hoofbeats each morning, though she would never admit it aloud. For the first time in years, their days held more than survival. They held laughter. They held warmth. They held the beginning of a family neither had dared to dream of. But shadows still lingered, Mary's fear of gossip, her mistrust of happiness, and the whispers of townsfolk who noticed the ranchers' visits and began to talk. And though Thomas's presence was a balm to their wounded hearts, Mary knew storms of another kind were still coming. For every moment of light Thomas Carter brought into their lives, shadows seemed to follow close behind. Mary had lived too long under the weight of judgment to believe happiness could come without a cost. And in Dry Creek, nothing stayed hidden. For long it started with whispers in the general store. Women gathered near the bolts of cloth, pretending to browse while their voices carried loud enough for Mary to hear. "Have you seen him? Riding out to her place again?" A widow with a child, no less. Bold of her, isn't it? Or desperate? Mary kept her head high, her hands clenched around the basket of soap she had come to buy. She told herself she didn't care, that the opinions of others could not touch her anymore. But the sting remained, burrowing deep into the cracks of her pride. One afternoon, as she walked with Anna through the dusty street, a ranch hand called out from the saloon porch. "Hey, Mary, better watch yourself. Folks are saying Carter's already got a new family. Didn't take him long to replace the last one." The men around him laughed, their cruel humor spilling into the air like sour whiskey. Mary's face burned hot, her chest tight with shame and fury. She pulled Anna close and hurried away, refusing to let them see her cry. That night, after Anna had fallen asleep, Mary sat alone by the fire. The warmth should have comforted her, but instead it illuminated her fears. She remembered John, his smile, his strong hands, the way his laughter used to fill their home. Losing him had nearly broken her, and now, just as she had begun to find her footing again, the idea of opening her heart to another man terrified her. What if Thomas left? What if he grew weary of their struggles, of the burden of raising another man's child? She had survived abandonment once. She wasn't sure she could survive it again. When Thomas arrived the next day with seed for their small garden, Mary met him at the door, her words sharp though her heart ached. "You shouldn't come here so often," she said. "People are talking." Thomas stood still, his face unreadable. "Let them." "You don't understand," she insisted. "They'll drag your name through the mud, and Anna, she hears the things they say. It hurts her." He stepped closer, his voice calm but steady. "I know what they say about you, about me. I've lived with gossip long enough to know it doesn't feed a man's horse or keep him warm at night. Words are just words, Mary. They can't break what's already broken, and they can't take away what's worth keeping." Mary's throat tightened, but she looked away, unwilling to let him see the tears threatening her eyes. "I can't risk Anna's heart. She's been hurt enough." Thomas's gaze softened, and for a moment the silence between them was thick with unspoken truths. "Finally," he said quietly, "I'm not here to hurt her, or you." Then, as always, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Mary torn between the safety of her walls and the dangerous hope pressing against them. That night, Anna curled beside her mother, her small voice whispering in the dark. "Mama, why do you push him away? He makes you smile when you think I don't see." Mary's heart cracked at her daughter's words. She smoothed Anna's hair and kissed her forehead. "Because sometimes, my love, smiling can hurt worse than crying." But even as she said it, she knew the truth. She was no longer afraid of what people thought. She was afraid of losing what she had only just begun to find Dot and Thomas Carter, with his steady presence and quiet strength, was becoming far too important to lose. Mary had begun to make plans in secret. Each passing week with Thomas only deepened the ache in her chest, a longing she didn't dare give voice to. But fear whispered louder than hope. She had lost once before. She would not gamble her daughter's heart on the chance of losing again. So, quietly, she decided they would leave Dry Creek. Perhaps they could find work in a larger town where gossip mattered less, where a widow and her child might disappear into the crowd. It wouldn't be easy, perhaps not even possible, but it felt safer than staying. Safer than letting her heart lean too heavily on a man who could walk away at any moment. But Thomas Carter was not blind. He saw the tightness in her jaw, the way she avoided his gaze when he rode up, the way her words grew shorter each time they spoke. And one evening, when he found her patching up the shack's roof with trembling hands, he knew she was preparing to leave. "Mary." His voice was firm, more commanding than she had ever heard from him. "What are you doing?" She froze, a scrap of canvas clutched in her fingers. "Making repairs," she said quickly, avoiding his eyes. He stepped closer, folding his arms across his chest. "Don't lie to me. You're planning to go." Her shoulders sagged. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with both defiance and sorrow. "You don't understand. The talk in town, it won't stop. They laugh at me, at Anna, and now at you. I won't be the reason you're mocked, Thomas. And I won't let my daughter grow up with that shame." For a long moment, he said nothing. The wind stirred between them, carrying the scent of dust and the sound of a distant meadowlark. Then Thomas stepped forward, his voice low but steady, every word deliberate. "Mary, I've lived alone for years. I've heard the whispers that I'm cursed, that I can't keep a family, that I'll die out there on that ranch with nothing but ghosts for company. And maybe they're right. Maybe I am cursed. But I'll tell you this, I'd rather bear every whisper, every laugh, every cruel word, if it means I don't have to spend another night in that empty house. Her breath caught, the raw honesty in his voice cutting through her defenses. I don't care what this town says, he continued, his gaze never leaving hers. I care about you. And that little girl of yours. You've both brought life back into a place I thought was dead forever. I won't let fear or gossip or your pride drive you away from me. Tears stung Mary's eyes, though she fought them back. And if you tire of us? If one day you decide this burden is too heavy? What then, Thomas? What happens to Anna's heart when you leave? For the first time, his voice broke not with weakness, but with a grief that mirrored her own. Mary, I know what it is to lose. I know what it is to stand over a grave and wish you'd never opened your heart in the first place. But I also know this closing yourself off doesn't protect you. It just makes the world colder. He took a breath, his eyes steady on hers. I don't want cold anymore. I want you, both of you, for as long as you'll let me. The silence stretched, filled with the weight of everything he had laid bare. Mary's hands trembled as she pressed them to her face, torn between the instinct to run and the longing to believe. And then Anna's small voice broke the moment. She had crept to the doorway, her eyes wide. Mama, please, don't make him go. He makes the house warm. Mary's heart crumbled. She looked at her daughter, then at the man standing before her with such quiet determination, and realized she could not keep running. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. That night, after Thomas's words lingered in her heart like a fire she couldn't smother, Mary lay awake staring at the shadows on the ceiling. Anna slept soundly beside her, the soft rhythm of her breathing a reminder of innocence and trust. For so long, Mary had built her life on fear of poverty, fear of loneliness, fear of losing again. But fear had also kept her chained, unable to step beyond survival into living. Thomas's voice echoed in her mind. Closing yourself off doesn't protect you. It just makes the world colder. And hadn't she felt that cold for years? Wasn't she tired of it? By dawn, her decision was made not with dramatic resolve, but with a quiet surrender. She was tired of walls, tired of running. She wanted warmth for Anna, and maybe, just maybe, for herself too. When Thomas arrived later that morning, carrying a sack of seed potatoes, Mary didn't greet him with guarded eyes or clipped words. Instead, she stood in the doorway with Anna's hand in hers, her voice trembling but sure. Thomas, if your offer still stands, we'll come. For the first time since she had met him, she saw his expression break fully relief, gratitude, and a joy so deep it startled her. His eyes softened, and a small, genuine smile curved his lips. Then let's get you both home, he said simply. Move wasn't grand. They had little to bring, just a few patched clothes, Anna's rag doll, and the quilt Mary had stitched from scraps of John's old shirts. But when they arrived at Thomas's ranch, the world felt different. The wide field stretched out like open arms, the sturdy house stood strong against the wind, and for the first time in years, Mary felt she could breathe. Anna ran through the grass, her laughter carrying on the breeze. She explored the barn, squealing with delight at the horses, and followed Thomas eagerly as he showed her how to scatter grain for the hens. Mary watched from the porch, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions, grief for what she had lost, wonder for what she had found, and a cautious hope that perhaps she and Anna had finally come home. The first days were not without challenge. Mary felt awkward in the kitchen of another man's house, unsure of her place. At night, doubts crept in, whispering that this happiness was too fragile to last. But each time fear threatened to overwhelm her, Thomas's steady presence anchored her. He didn't demand or expect. He simply included her, asking her thoughts about planting, listening when she spoke of her worries, and treating Anna not as a burden, but as a gift. One evening, as the three of them sat at the supper table, a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and fresh milk, Anna looked up with shining eyes. "Can I call you Pa?" she asked Thomas suddenly. Mary froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Her heart pounded as she glanced at Thomas, fearing his reaction. But Thomas set down his spoon, his gaze soft as he looked at the little girl. "You can call me whatever you like," he said gently. "But if you call me Pa, I'll do my best to be worthy of it." Anna beamed, and Mary felt tears burn in her eyes. That night, as she tucked her daughter into bed in the small room Thomas had prepared for her, Anna whispered, "Mama, I think God answered our prayers." Mary pressed a kiss to her forehead, her throat too tight to speak. And later, when she stepped outside to find Thomas repairing the fence under the glow of twilight, she knew the truth. They were no longer alone. A new family had formed, not through convenience, not through obligation, but through choice. And choice, Mary realized, was the most powerful bond of all. The seasons shifted quickly on the prairie. Winter's sharp winds gave way to spring's thaw, and with it, Mary and Anna's new life began to bloom. Each day on Thomas's ranch carried a rhythm that was both steady and healing. Mornings filled with the crow of roosters and the scent of wood smoke. Afternoons marked by the work of mending fences, planting seeds, and milking cows. Evenings closed with lamplight and laughter at the supper table. Mary, once consumed by the weight of grief and uncertainty, began to see her world in colors again. She found herself humming while hanging laundry on the line, smiling when Anna came in from the fields with her hair tangled and her cheeks flushed from play. The ranch wasn't just Thomas's anymore, it was theirs. Yet, it wasn't just the physical home that changed them. It was the love woven into every small gesture. Thomas always made space for Mary's thoughts and never let her forget her worth. He praised her for her resilience and treated her not as a widow to be pitied, but as a partner to be cherished. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of orange and gold, Thomas surprised Mary. "I've been thinking," he said, rubbing the back of his neck as if suddenly shy. "You and Anna, you've already given this place a soul it didn't have before, but I'd like to make it proper if you'd let me." Mary's heart skipped. "Proper?" she whispered. He met her gaze with quiet steadiness. "Mary, will you be my wife?" For a moment, time stood still. She thought of the years of loneliness, the cruel whispers in town, the nights she had cried into her pillow so Anna wouldn't hear. She thought of the man standing before her now, gentle, patient, steadfast. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded, unable to speak. Anna, peeking from the porch steps, squealed and clapped her hands. "Mama?" he asked. Laughter broke through Mary's tears, and Thomas pulled both mother and daughter into his arms. The wedding was simple, held beneath the open sky with only a few close neighbors in attendance. Some townsfolk still whispered, but it no longer mattered. Mary didn't need their approval. She had found her place, her partner, her peace. As husband and wife, Mary and Thomas built their days not on riches or grandeur, but on love and labor. They worked side by side, shoulder to shoulder. Mary discovered a strength in herself she hadn't known existed. Thomas, in turn, discovered joy in sharing his life with two people who had filled his once empty house with laughter and warmth. Anna thrived in this new world. She grew strong, learning to ride horses, gather eggs, and even help Thomas drive cattle. Where once she had felt like an outsider in town, she now belonged to something larger. She had a family, and a father who called her his daughter. Years later, as the prairie bloomed golden under the summer sun, Mary would often sit on the porch and watch Anna run across the fields, her laughter carrying far on the wind. And she would look at Thomas, steady, loyal Thomas, and marvel at the strange, beautiful turns of fate. She had been a widow with nothing, an orphan girl's weary mother. He had been a solitary rancher with no family but the land. By chance or, perhaps by providence, their lives had collided, and from that collision, a new story had been written, not of despair, but of hope, not of loneliness, but of belonging. The orphan girl and her widowed mother had found not just survival, but joy. And the rancher who had once lived in silence now woke each day to the sound of laughter. Love and home, changed forever together.